Hello and a warm welcome to the viewers of ETV Bharat. I'm Smita Sharma and we are back with yet another episode of Battleground USA 2020, our conversation series where we are taking a close look at various aspects of big presidential polls in the United States slated for November this year amid a pandemic. And with the Democrats and the Republicans, in fact, are now over with their national convention process with the official nomination of Joe Biden and Donald Trump as the presidential candidates. In this episode, what we are going to talk about is what is at stake as far as the United States leadership in international organizations or multilateralism is concerned. And to talk about it, I'm joined by a special panel here. I'm joined by Ambassador Ashok Mukherjee. He's a retired, in fact, a career diplomat who has also served as India's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York. I'm joined by Yoshita Singh. She's a senior journalist with the Press Trust of India, PTI, in New York, and has been covering the United Nations for a very long time. I'm also joined by Rajeshwari Rajagopalan. She's a distinguished fellow and head for the Nuclear and Space Initiative at Observer Research Foundation. She has also formerly served as a technical advisor with the United Nations. To begin with, in fact, Ambassador Mukherjee, if I could start with you, because there was this tweet by AP, which is the news agency, that said, 100 days away, US officially leaves the Paris Climate Agreement on 4th of December, to which Joe Biden retweeted it with the comments saying, and in 146 days, we will rejoin it. So for you, really, talking about the broader aspect here, what is at stake when it comes to these organizations post-November?
Well, what is at stake is really the leadership role that the United States has played since January 1942. It's a long, long journey from the Washington Conference, which set in process the move to create the United Nations. And the leadership role that the United States acquired over these decades has somehow been dented, if not diluted, in the past 5 to 6 years. And the outcome of this election will really have a major impact on that central issue. I think that the withdrawal, withdrawing from institutions has a downside, which has to be understood. I'll give you an example. In 2006, the United Nations General Assembly created the UN Human Rights Council. Now, Ambassador John Bolton was the US ambassador, and he, of course, voted against the creation of this council. There were 3 other countries which voted against it, but the council was created by a majority of 170 countries. Now, the United States sat out 3 years, did not seek elections to the Human Rights Council, and in those 3 years, the Human Rights Council set in place its procedures, including the procedure to deal with Israel. Now, you fast forward it to Ambassador Nikki Haley's time, and then they criticize the procedures. But if you're not inside the room when the procedures are drafted, then you cannot really do anything about those procedures from outside. And I think the same danger stares the United States in the face if they do withdraw from the international organizations that they have already announced they are withdrawing from, including the World Health Organization. I mean, that's, right. It doesn't make any sense from the perspective of US national interest.
And we'll in fact come to some of those specifics also about the organizations and pacts, because there are at least more than half a dozen pacts that the Trump administration has really pulled out of. But Yoshita, you've covered the United Nations General Assembly for almost 9 years, and perhaps this is the first time, as we were discussing, that you are going to attend a virtual session or a less crowded physical session. You may have a little bit of withdrawal symptoms about it, but is this really an issue which is being discussed by DC at large, or is it only a small issue in a political manifesto?
The issue of the General Assembly, Smita?
The issue of withdrawals from international organizations, or multilateral pacts.
Right. I mean, we saw President Trump's speech yesterday, and he sort of said that very proudly. He told his audience that he has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. He has withdrawn funding to the WHO. So, he is sort of boasting about this, that yes, he is taking, the United States away from all these pacts and agreements. And so I mean, they don't think that they're not second thinking it at all or second guessing as to whether they should be back, irrespective of the kind of pressure or the multilateral, coalition that people require at this point of time. So, and just to, as Ambassador Mukherjee also pointed out, if regarding the Human Rights Council, I want to give an example of the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, the United States pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, but then they want now to snap back these sanctions again, and they are saying that the US can do that and trigger a snapback. But the UN Security Council here was like, no, you can't. You pulled out of the deal, then you cannot dictate the terms of those deals. Then if you're not part of that agreement. So here there is obviously this lack of leadership that we are all seeing from the United States. And they are gung-ho about it. And if President Trump comes back, I mean, he will then obviously take it forward, and whatever other agreements that he does not like or he feels that does not suit US interests, then he will withdraw from those. And then in those cases, then we'll see countries like China, which are really, wanting to fill this void, and they will fill this void. I mean, the influence of China has been growing in the United Nations, and it's only going to propel China and other authoritarian regimes to sort of then step in and take this leadership role that will be left in a void.
Absolutely. So Dr. Rajagopalan, coming to you, I mean, you are somebody who understands nuclear issues very, very keenly, watches them keenly, and understands them well. So on the Iran nuclear deal, I mean, for something like a deal which is so complex, which was negotiated after so many years, if Donald Trump actually comes back to power and decides that this is not worth a second shot, I'm not going to get back into the room, what are the dangers there then for the region, or even for a country like India? What are the risks that we are looking at?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. There are nuclear issues is a key element of the whole non-proliferation set of challenges in a sense. But I think the problem is also that the Obama administration went ahead with a deal which was quite heavily skewed in favor of Iran. It may not be the most popular view, but the fact is that Iran managed to bargain such a great deal for themselves. The kind of clauses that are there in terms of withdrawal, in terms of inspections, each of those different clauses, when you take a look at it, I think Iran is known for famous or notorious for their bargaining kind of tactics, and they really bargain. And the Obama administration, as well as Secretary of State John Kerry at that point of time, they were just keen to have one agreement with Iran. It didn't matter whether it was a perfect deal. And I've spoken to several American former officials and analysts, and they all say, we needed something for sure. We needed something to stop the Iranians from pursuing this nuclear program at this stage. They know that Iran is going to pursue a weapon program in the future, but it was just a matter of buying time in a sense. And so the deal was just seen as a temporary measure, maybe 10 years time, or even within 10 years, because even back in the 90s, if you remember, President Bill Clinton had a deal with the North Koreans when he came out and said, Korean Peninsula is now all stable and secure. There's not going. Within a decade, in about a decade's time, you saw North Korea conducting its first nuclear test. In the case of Iran, my sense is that you would have seen a nuclear weapon test even within that decade in a sense. So Iran is one of those hard proliferation cases, come what may, irrespective of the sanctions on technological kind of hurdles, they are going to pursue nuclear program.
But do you think this is going to be a sort of a real complex game if Biden were actually to make it to the White House? I mean, with all the attacks of Biden and Beijing links, of saying that he is soft and favorable to China, and Yoshita there very rightfully talking about, we are seeing that strategic, in fact, agreement which is in the works between Iran and China. How do you see it panning out if it's a team Biden and Harris in White House?
Yeah, I think it's going to put the Biden team in a very tight spot as to how they should, because for instance, even the Biden team has come out to proving that he's even stronger, has a harsher tone towards China. So how do you deal with the China problem? The China challenge has become magnified a lot more in the last few years, and it's like Yoshita said, the China's takeover, or at least getting into leadership roles within many of the UN organization and kind of thing. So it is actually ceding away it has ceded away a lot of strategic space to China. And Biden now will be in a fix in how you manage both the Iran-China, a combination of powers, not just Iran and China, Iran, China, Russia, all of them coming together in a sense. And they just had a naval exercise a few months ago, towards the end of last year, actually. So in a sense, that is already a sort of trilateral or another quadrilateral with the Pakistan possibly part of it and so on and so forth. So there are, the geopolitical competition is picking up, has intensified a lot more. So for any administration, it's going to be tough. But for Democrats, I think this is going to be even harder, especially after the Trump administration. That's going to put them in a tight spot in how you manage some of these tricky issues, whether it is China, Iran, and of course, the Russia problem is not going to go away.
Ambassador Mukherjee, Mark Esper, the defense secretary, in fact, just yesterday at an event in Hawaii, he was, of course, he was giving an address on the Indo-Pacific, where it was laced constantly with attacks on China as along expected lines. He blamed China for an opacity that, the coronavirus emerged from China, but they were opaque with World Health Organization and did not cooperate, thereby capitalizing also on the misfortunes of others. But on the one hand, where he is blaming China for not being opaque, on the other hand, you have them pull out of WHO completely. I mean, it's like throwing the baby with the bathwater. So, what is the solution here moving forward?
Well, as I said in the beginning, the solution has to come from within the World Health Organization. You cannot recreate another World Health Organization. I mean, that institution has a long history. It has a reason to function the way it does. And I think there are 2 or 3 issues which we must keep in mind no matter who comes to the White House after these November elections. The first is that the United States government does give a lot of money to the WHO budget, but there are equal amounts of money coming from non-governmental sources, including American corporations, to the World Health Organization budget. So the budget issue is not such a big weapon, if I may call it that, as is being projected sometimes by spokespersons for this US administration. The second point is that the WHO has served the interests of American business very well. And I think that this is something that is lost sight of completely. Even as I speak, the Ebola vaccine, which is to counter the Ebola virus, is being tested on behalf of Merck, an American company, by the World Health Organization in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And there's a payment of $175,000 given by the Trump administration to the WHO for this project. So, when you have a fact like this, then it's difficult to sustain the argument that there is something wrong with the WHO and we need to do something. And the third point, which most people have missed, is that the Trump administration actually sought to be elected to the executive board of the WHO. Right. And it is bizarre to note that for 2.5 years, they didn't even nominate a person to represent the United States in the executive board, including in the meetings which considered the pandemic. And it was only in April this year that a former admiral has now reached the WHO executive board for the last 6 months of their term. So, there is a mismatch between how these organizations function. And if you have to deal with these issues, you have to deal with them from within. And the best place is within the executive board.
So, but also, doesn't it complicate with the fact that if one of the allegations that the United States made while pulling out of the WHO was that the WHO had a sharp leaning towards Beijing, that it was acting on its behest. But if the US actually starts pulling out based on these premises, you are causing a further vacuum which can actually be manipulated even further by the very Chinese that you propose to oppose.
Yes, and I think that that's a very good point that you have made, and I would apply it to other organizations. There's one organization which is very important for India, for example, multilateral organization, which is under a similar threat, and that is the World Trade Organization. Right. Now, for example, the Trump administration has carried forward a policy which it may have seen in the beginning, but it has focused on it because of the current US trade representative's own background, and has completely emasculated the dispute settlement structure of the World Trade Organization, a structure which has given the United States as much pain as joy as it has to other members of the WTO. Now, the consequence of that has been a coming together of the European Union and China, who have created an interim arrangement to uphold the World Trade Organization's dispute settlement structure and apply WTO rules. Now, the rest of us are completely out of this loop. And when you remember that 40% of our GDP comes from international trade, the value and importance of the World Trade Organization speaks for itself for India's aspirations to become a $5 trillion economy. So we cannot, sit by and watch.
Absolutely. Yoshita, coming to another pact that the US had pulled out of under Trump administration, the Paris Climate Pact. I mean, we are looking at a time when I was just seeing tweets about the California wildfires that have devastated, people and their lives. You were talking about Hurricane Laura that was mentioned by both Ivanka and Donald Trump at the very start of the Republican National Convention in their speeches. Is this an issue that also has a resonance with people? Not just something that is a talking point between the leaders of the two parties or senators or congressmen, but are people and the states, do they also relate to this issue as an election issue maybe?
So, no, definitely. I mean, because the people, Smita, are seeing the repercussions of climate change or the worst impacts of climate change right in front of them. Climate change is not a textbook topic that, they studied online or in school or in college and then nothing, it's not impacting. As you mentioned, the hurricanes, the wildfires, the floods across Asia. I mean, this is all the impact of climate change. And then it's now for all of us to see, and all of us are sort of bearing the brunt of it in real life. And so in that sense, when the Trump administration, the US, which has been one of the historically the biggest polluters, I mean, pulls out of an agreement that was not decided upon in a week's time or a month's time. It took a lot of years, a lot of efforts, a lot of give and take. Many stakeholders are involved in agreement, and the Paris agreement then has repercussions for all of us and all of us human beings, especially the vulnerable societies, the small islands and the developing nations. So in that sense, with the superpower pulling out of it, it's definitely very tragic. But also on the states on their own level. I mean, when the US pulled out of the agreement, the states, a lot of corporations said that no, they will abide by whatever the requirements of the Paris Agreement are, of whatever they can do to ensure that the greenhouse gas emissions are limited, they don't increase pollution. So on the state level, on corporation level, and even on the individual level, I mean, people haven't sort of withdrawn from the agreement. They're saying that they'll do whatever it takes to ensure that if they can minimize their greenhouse gas emission and footprints, I mean, that will help in some way or the other to ensuring a better future and a better climate for our future generations. And we've also heard the Secretary General last night at the Darbari State Memorial Lecture. I mean, he pointed out that you have to move from fossil fuels, you have to depend on clean energy, and that should be a focus as countries go back in a post-COVID world to build back better. You cannot depend and go back to the same fossil fuel or kind of energy requirements that you had. I mean, you have to think green, you have to think clean, because the pandemic, all these effects that we see, whether it's the hurricanes and tornadoes and wildfires, I mean, they're not just coming out of nowhere. Something led to that, and you have to then take into account what you need to do moving back further in a post-COVID world.
But Yoshita, do you get a sense that this will transcend from being a policy issue into an electoral issue, where it's also on people's mind when they vote?
My sense is maybe not so much. They won't probably think of climate change as a very big issue when they vote, because I think at this point of time, it's more about the economy, it's more about jobs, it's more about healthcare, especially in the pandemic that we've seen. The US might be the most powerful country in the world, the most financially strong country in the world, but the pandemic really brought it to its knees. The public health infrastructure came tumbling down. So I think those will be the issues. And again, but when you hear President Trump, I mean, yesterday he was, as you mentioned, we felt that as of the pandemic is behind us, that everything is fine and we're moving forward and job creation and beating China up on it. So maybe, climate change will be an important issue, but for my sense is that maybe the voters will not look at that particular issue and then decide as to where they should vote.
I mean, as another senior journalist, Seema Sirohi, described it in an earlier conversation, that it looked surreal and felt like there were two different alternate universes, looking at those maskless men sitting in White House, celebrating the night, and, the protesters outside. But Rajeshwari, coming to you then, I mean, when Donald Trump, in that Black Swan event when he won the elections in 2016, many thought that you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose, there would be enough institutional checks and balances, but he defied all of that. He truly came across as a man who was true to his promises. The international community may have hated that. if he returns right now, what are the signals? I mean, for an administration where top leaders have been dropped like pack of cards, they have been sacked on Twitter, Bolton gone, Bannon gone. For all I know, Esper may also be on his way out by the time the elections wrap up. What really is your hope in the sense of, is there a voice within the Republicans that may ask Trump to take an alternate view of these agreements?
I think there is very little hope in that sense within the, I think the Trump administration will carry on with his own personal view, his belief, and it's all on Twitter. His policy outlines and everything comes out in, you know, those 160 words, nothing more, nothing less. I don't think he has even the sort of inkling to kind of read up policy notes and study anything of that kind. I think we have seen that play out in the last 3.5, 4 years now. But I think I just also quickly wanted to talk about the one on the WHO, for instance. I just wanted to highlight. I think, okay, the US has pulled out, and that's a huge issue in a sense, like I said, ceding away space to China and kind of places. But I think it also puts in an honest, I think this, in a sense, showed the kind of the need for the urgent need for review and reforms of some of the multilateral organizations that needs to happen so that these organizations are not beholden to one single power. They are not hijacked by one single power, and the leadership of these multilateral organizations do not remain, you know, taken over by one particular country. And I think that has to be done. And I think India also has the leadership potential, has the responsibility at this point of time to partner with some of the like-minded countries in coming together, work with their allies and partners to promote neutrality, transparency, accountability, so that these institutions work in a professional manner. They are able to carry out their a professional function in an effective manner. I think that's right. The pandemic and the WHO kind of failings in the initial stages because of China's misinformation campaigns and so on and so forth clearly brought out that lacunae or the failings of some of the multilateral institutions. And I think so therefore the larger point I wanted to make is the reform and review and reform of the multilateral institutions are absolutely important. India needs to partner with possible like-minded countries in working on that particular aspect. On the question whether you know who else is going to be in power and what is going to be the play kind of thing, I think it's very difficult to predict as to who's the next one who's going to go out and step out and say. But I think there is one of the problems with his policy has been that he has managed to go it alone in a sense. Even when the whole world was confronted, much of the world was confronting the China problem, because having faced the brunt of the Chinese belligerent, aggressive act in their own neighborhood or even far away and so on and so forth, whether it's Canada, whether it's Sweden and countries like that. But the fact is that he did not carry his allies along with him. I think that's been part of his problem. Confronting China straight up front, I think that's something that was required, that was not coming through in the previous administration, whether it is Obama and the Clintons and so on and so forth. But I think, so that approach is clearly needed, that you need to confront China. It is, the time has come for that.
But would you, very briefly, Raji, would you say that, you know, as a lot of the experts have been defining, that US has gone into an inward looking mode and has sort of vacated the leadership space, is it really true to sort of make those big brush strokes? Or, I mean, in Indo-Pacific, you still see them in a very active mode at the moment.
Absolutely. I think both the facts are true in a sense. The US has been sort of, you know, slowly shrinking its role and kind of things. And this is something to do with, for instance, the second Bush administration, when he was in office, I think he went unilateral. He did the Iraq and Afghanistan. So there was a kind of a pushback. So when Obama came to office, he went the other way, the other extreme. He gave too much of weight to the multilateralism. He truly believed. And I think the language of multilateralism was good, but I think he should have believed in somewhat more unilateral kind of leadership role. The US to play the decisive leadership role that you did not see, especially in the first term of the Obama administration. I thought there was a lot of strategic space that went away at that point of time itself to China, and it has been difficult to recapture that strategic space in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, for instance. So how that will play out in the future, again, Biden can try, but I think you already seeing a much stronger and much more powerful and sort of an insecure nation in China. So it's that much more challenging to deal with that problem in this.
Okay. The final comments, Ambassador Mukherjee, you know, it's also in a few months of time when India takes that seat on the United Nations Security Council as a non-permanent member. How complicated will India's position be if US sort of continues with this confrontational approach to multilateral organizations and agreements internationally?
Well, I think that what we need to keep in mind is that as an elected member, not a non-permanent, but an
Sorry,
elected
as
member,
an elected, sorry, member. Yeah, my apologies.
we need to firstly be cognizant of the realities, the ground realities of sitting in that chamber, the Security Council chamber. And the ground reality is that as long as these 5 countries have the veto, there is nothing that we as elected members can do about anything. So this is what needs to change. And I hope that reform multilateralism, which our foreign minister has been speaking about, really focuses on the need to reform the veto privilege of these 5 countries, because these were never negotiated. The Australians have a big record of the negotiations. They can tell you that the veto was parachuted into the San Francisco Treaty. It was not negotiated among the member states. That is first. But I think that, as Rajshri has mentioned, and Yoshita as well, that we need now to work together as a coalition of countries to uphold the values of the multilateral system. After all, the multilateral system has a benefit for us, and that's what each of this group of countries which will be in this coalition will have to talk about. When I used to work in the United Nations, the question was often asked, what does the United Nations actually do apart from talking all the time? And my answer used to be to look towards the sustainable development work of the United Nations. That's the kind of value that it brings to the table. But today, India is different. India has also grown and has aspirations through her own strategic frameworks. And I think that politically, inside that Security Council chamber, India will have to show more activism on, especially on issues in and around our neighborhood, issues in Asia. I think issues like Yemen, like Syria, issues where we have economic investments like South Sudan, we cannot let these be handled by the permanent members all the time because they have not been able to do anything. So can we get together a coalition? And that trend is been visible in the Security Council in the past 2 or 3 years. Germany has demonstrated it very effectively. And I hope we can take on the mantle that Germany will be passing on because Germany finishes its term. So this is what I look forward to.
Okay, and the final comments to you, Yoshita. I mean, even if it were a Biden victory, supposedly, and it's a hypothetical question, but how dicey would then the numbers be in the US Congress? What, in terms of the implications of the US wanting to return to the folds of agreements that it has walked out of? And which are the other agreements that at the moment you think the dark shadow is being cast on?
Right. So, I mean, yes, if President Biden, in the future, I mean, hypothetically, if he is the president and he would want to come back, I think then he will get that done. I mean, because if the President Trump said he'll pull out, and he did pull out. So, and there are chances that Democrats will hold the Senate. There are chances that the Democrats will hold the House also. So, in that sense, maybe they have the numbers. Maybe a Biden White House will be able to bring back America into a lot of these agreements that he feels. Obviously, then he will take the call as to where he wants to go back in. But I also want to point out that next 2 years there are about 15 elections to key UN bodies, key heads of UN organizations, agencies. And so if President Trump has been very critical of the United Nations as well, I mean, not just its agencies, but the UN as a whole. So, if we have a President Trump in that sense, and if you don't put out your candidature of American candidature for these seats, then we will see, countries like China and other countries that want to increase their influence in the UN, they will put forward their candidature, and then they will, their candidates and other candidates will sit at the head of these organizations, which will then make the call and, call the shots and make decisions. So I think in that sense, the US has to see that you cannot move out of multilateralism altogether. In the pandemic also, we have seen whether it's the vaccines or whether it's healthcare, it has to be a global collaboration. I mean, one country cannot do it alone. And the United States moving out of these collaborations, it's not benefiting their cause at all.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, the airports may be locked down, the borders may be closed, but it's a virtually connected world that's trying to figure out collective global solutions to major issues that face all of humankind and humanity. Appreciate all of you joining us, Yoshita in New York. I'm hoping that COVID is behind us by next year at least, so that we both get to cover the General Assembly in person instead of through a webinar. And Ambassador Mukherjee as well as Rajeshwari Rajagopalan for your wonderful insights, like always, into a complicated issue. And I think bottom line is that while, of course, the United States needs to wake up, smell the coffee, make sure that it goes ahead with those leadership roles and expectations that a superpower nation is expected to play. But at the same time, as Ambassador Mukherjee also highlighted, I think India will have to figure out its own leadership goals and, do away with any sort of reticence or fence setting when it comes to important issues where it has to actually rather take on the role of an activist nation as well.
But I think it's going to be a lot more complicated given that China's managed to penetrate into so many of these organizations.
Yes. No, I'm not waging a bet
not,
at all in things
exactly,
being simple.
yeah.
It's going to be complicated days ahead.
Exactly.
Thank you once again, all of
Thank
you for finding time, and for all the viewers of ETV Bharat, if you tuned in, thank you so much, and do continue watching this special series, Battleground USA 2020. For now, it's a goodbye and take care.